Welcome back to Decode Healthcare with Harshal. I am so pumped to have you here for another Zero Fluff Explainer. Now, in Part 21, we successfully mapped out the really complex terrain of multiple coding, but today we're shifting gears to tackle a brand new challenge straight out of the official rulebook, Section IB8.
Okay, picture this real-world scenario. A patient presents in your facility suffering from a sudden, super sharp acute flare-up, but they also have the long-term chronic version of the exact same disease at the exact same time. It is a total clash on the chart. So our mission today is learning exactly what you need to do when these sudden and long-term conditions collide. Which code goes first? Getting this right is absolutely vital for clean claims.
So here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the acute first mandate, then look at the indentation trap, walk through some real-world coding examples, and finally wrap up with audit blocks and consequences. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The acute first mandate.
Now, before we even touch a code, we have to establish the absolute authority of the CMS official guidelines for coding and reporting. This strictly overrides any textbook you might have. Section IB8 is crystal clear, stating, if the same condition is described as both acute or subacute and chronic and separate subentries exist in the alphabetic index at the same indentation level, code both and sequence the acute code first. Guys, this is hard law. You don't just arbitrarily pick the worst one, and you definitely don't combine them unless specifically instructed. If separate codes exist under these conditions, you have to report both.
Think about it this way to understand the golden rule here. The acute condition is basically a lightning bolt. It's sudden, it's severe, and it's the primary focus that dynamically triggered today's immediate medical urgency. The chronic condition, on the other hand, is more like an hourglass. It's a long-term, underlying issue that just naturally takes a back seat as the secondary focus. The lightning bolt goes straight to the top, while the hourglass drops down the list.
Because that acute manifestation is what actually brought the patient through the doors, it completely dictates the immediate encounter. And that firmly secures its place in the primary or first listed slot on your claim form. So your process is going to look exactly like this. Step 1, you sequence the acute code in slot number 1. Step 2, you sequence the chronic code in slot number 2. The golden rule is always acute first, chronic second.
Moving right along to Section 2, the indentation trap.
All right, listen up, because this next detail constantly trips up students and honestly catches seasoned pros off guard all the time. I call it the indentation trap. The CMS rule we just talked about only triggers if the alphabetic index mathematically aligns the terms. We're talking about the literal spatial alignment of subterms here. You can't just combine codes blindly just because a doctor scribbled acute and chronic in the notes. To actually apply this acute first rule, both the acute and chronic subterms must sit perfectly aligned at the exact same indentation tier under the main term.
Let's look at a classic example to make sense of this. Cholecystitis, or gallbladder inflammation. Notice how we start with the main term, cholecystitis. Then, look right below it. See how the subterms for acute and chronic sit perfectly parallel to each other? They are aligned at the exact same indentation tier in the book's hierarchy. That visual, spatial alignment in the index is exactly what forces the dual code combination.
So the takeaway here is that because the index serves them up cleanly at the exact same level, your sequence must rigidly follow the acute first law. The correct coding is K81.0 for the acute condition sequenced first, followed by K81.1 for the chronic condition sequenced second. If you flip them so the chronic code comes first, you are in direct violation of Section IB8.
Let's put this into practice with Section 3 real-world coding examples.
The best way to lock this master rule into your brain is to see it in action again. Here, we have a diagnosis of acute and chronic thyroiditis. When we crack open our books and search the main term thyroiditis in the index, we see that exact same formatting pattern. The subterms for acute and chronic sit right there at the exact same indentation level. Therefore, they demand the exact same sequential treatment. We code both, and the acute code E06.0 absolutely must be sequenced before the chronic code E065.
To make this totally foolproof for you, here is a simple coder's workflow. This is how you confidently navigate the index without falling into the trap. First, search the main term. Second, visually verify the indentation levels of the subterms. Are they aligned? Awesome. Proceed to Step 3. Sequence the acute code in slot 1. And finally, Step 4.
Sequence the chronic code in slot 2. Stick to this 4-step checklist and your sequencing will be bulletproof every single time.
Section 4. Audit blocks and consequences.
Okay, so why are we obsessing over this hyper-specific formatting rule? Well, it's definitely not just an academic exercise. If you accidentally sequence that chronic code ahead of the acute code, when both are present and meet the indentation criteria, you are going to trigger automated clearinghouse checks. Imagine your digital claim form passing through the system, and suddenly, boom, a massive red alert pops up warning of a sequencing conflict and telling you to review section IB8.
The real-world stakes are incredibly high here. Flipping the codes basically empowers the automated audit systems, the gatekeepers of your billing cycle, to flag your work as an illogical sequencing error. That leads to an immediate claim form rejection. And what does that actually mean for your facility? A severe slowdown of reimbursement cycles, incredibly frustrated providers, and a massively increased risk of broader compliance audits. Following the acute first mandate is literally what turns your claim into a green checkmark for fast, accurate payment.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the master rule of sequencing for acute and chronic conditions. If you found this Zero Fluff explainer helpful today, please go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with your fellow coders so we can all stay out of the audit trap.
But hey, don't go too far, because our journey through the guidelines is not over yet. I want to leave you with a provocative question. What happens when the codebook single-handedly merges a disease and its manifestations into one single, powerful code block? In our next explainer, Part 23, we'll be decoding Section IB9, combination codes. Trust me, you are not going to want to miss seeing how that transforms our entire coding workflow. Catch you next time!